everyone, Sycra here, and today I want to introduce you to a technique that I've been working on for a very long time, and I actually introduced it in its early form in a video I did 2 years ago called How to Practice Drawing, and that technique is what I call iterative drawing. Iterative drawing. And I think this is the fastest way to improve, and it's especially good for people who are analytical and not quite as intuitive, although it does work for intuitive people. But I found that for analytical people, it's just very, very good at breaking this thing where analytical people tend to just think too much. And the way I think of it, and of course this is not exactly how, the brain works in terms of biology, but let's pretend this is a brain and you have two sides. So this is what I mean by this isn't exactly how it works, but let's just say you have the creative side, and that's the intuitive side, and you have the analytical side. So with intuitive people, they're basically drawing, but they can't really explain what it is they're doing to draw so well. But they tend to have a very good ability to draw. And I feel like in many respects, these are the people who get called talented. They can't really tell you how they're doing what they're doing, but they have a good grasp on, just being able to do the things and understanding drawing. Whereas analytical people, they have a bit of a harder time. For them, they're more likely to learn by going through tutorials or learning specific theory on instead of understanding color by just looking at a color and getting a feeling like, yeah, I think that's going to work. They might think more in terms of, okay, well, is this warm or cool? What color should this be based on some kind of theory? So it's my belief that we all have the ability to draw, or at least to see things to an extent, the way talented or intuitive people can. I think we all have that ability. The difference is that we may not have access to it, or some of us have more access than others. And the reason I think we all have that is because of dreams. Now, this is something I've thought about for many, many years. When I was a young kid, I used to wonder about this. Like, when we have dreams, we see people, right? In our dreams, the colors are right, the lighting is right, the proportions are right, the perspective is right. Everything is being constructed in our brain, and it's correct. But then when you go down to drawing on your page, often you can't carry that information over. And with intuitive people, I think they can quite a bit better. And there are varying degrees. It's not like you're either analytical or you're intuitive. You could be, let's say it's a spectrum with analytical on one side and then intuitive. Well, you could be anywhere on this spectrum. For myself, I think I'm probably like around here, like very analytical, not too intuitive. For a guy like my friend Bob Meatbag, he's probably occupying the opposite end, where he's very intuitive, not too analytical, so he can't explain what he's doing. But anyway, so in dreams, we can construct this, and this goes for pretty much anyone, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're trained in drawing or not. You can build images in your head. You can build worlds in your head. And maybe it is just sort of memory, like your brain's recorded something and it's playing it back, but it's still playing back a thing. So, and the other thing is that you can look at something that's wrong, you can look at somebody and say like, oh, their leg's a bit longer than the other. Or you can look at a drawing and say, that eye is off. So you are able to tell. Now, what is the difference? I think the difference between an analytical person and an intuitive person and someone who is both is the bridge connecting them. So for analysis, you don't really, or for intuition, let's just say you're purely functioning on intuition. You can get really far without having to explain something, right? Like you could do drawings and they could be very good, and someone could ask you, how are you doing that? And you might say, I don't know. They might ask you to explain the perspective, and you might not be able to, but you don't need to because the drawing's there and it's done. And this is good. And also because you may not be that analytical, you may not judge your drawings quite so harshly. You know, you might not think like, oh, I noticed right away all the mistakes. Whereas an analytical person, on the other hand, may be in this mode where they can see their mistakes pretty quickly. They can really see what's wrong, but they can't imagine things so well. So how do you create this bridge? Because that's what I think is necessary, to create the bridge between intuition and analysis. And I think the way intuition is trained is just mileage. Now, I've mentioned this before, and this is what I talked about in my How to Practice Drawing video, the importance of mileage, the importance of not just, in that video I used it, the example of an eye. Don't just draw one eye and be super careful and, think, okay, this is a piece of art and I'm going to hang it up on the wall. But instead, get a page and do a ton of eyes. And that's going to help you a lot more. And what mileage is doing is it's really strengthening this part, the intuitive part. Because you need this. I feel like the intuitive part, maybe intuitive isn't perfect in explaining it, but it's the part that allows you to do just things that are muscle memory, whether it's riding a bike or walking or, just anything, swimming, anything you've trained that you just do over and over again by repetition. It can start off analytical, but then it can become intuitive. Like, for instance, if you learn a new language, at first it's very analytical. You're learning the letters, you're learning the words, but eventually it becomes intuitive and you don't have to think about it. You just speak in it. You become fluent. And so you need a ton of mileage, but mileage alone for someone who is analytical, it can be kind of hard. It's sort of vague to just say, draw a lot and you'll get better, because their problem or their benefit is they're analytical, but that's also their problem. Because what's happening is, instead of just drawing a lot, you tend to second guess yourself. This is a trap I fall into myself a lot. I second guess myself. I start to doubt the method. I feel like, okay, what if I draw and I put in a ton of mileage and I do this for 2 years and I still suck? It doesn't feel like I can have confidence in just this idea of drawing. Whereas if I look at a tutorial or a book or something that's telling me a theory, that's something I feel like I can apply right away. I can understand it, and then I can apply it. Like, oh, here's how colors work. There are warm and cool colors, and you have to play them against each other. There's saturation and hue and lightness, and these are your components to deal with color. It's like, okay. I can get that. But how does that translate into looking at an image and just knowing like, this color is going to work with this color. This is the right color to go with that color. And it's really through mileage, but not just mileage alone. And this is where I think my last video was a bit confusing, the one I did 2 years ago, because I didn't stress this enough, that it isn't just drawing. It's using all your brain power, all your analysis, and analyzing your drawings. So this is the essence of iterative drawing. Let's say this is a page, right? Now, instead of doing a drawing, and let's say you want to practice drawing a figure, let's say a head, right? The non-iterative approach, you get your head down, you measure everything, measure the proportions, and you do your drawing as best as you can. maybe you start with the head, you get the ear in, and then you go to the neck, and then you go down, and da. Now this is one way of drawing, right? You get this in, and then you're done. You think, okay, I did my head, I did my figure. I'm getting better at drawing, whatever. But this is pretty slow, especially if you don't have much mileage. If you are trying to make up for lost time or improve really quickly and you're analytical, this is what I'd suggest. Don't do this. Why? Because you're focusing on so many things. You're focusing on the head. You're focusing on the neck. You're focusing on anatomy and perspective and proportion and everything. If you're starting out, do this instead. Start your page with 20 head shapes. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just, I mean, I'm doing them very roughly. You can be more careful with them. But anyway, the point is, let's just say 20 for our magic number. So 20 heads, right? Okay, so start with that. Then what you want to do is individually go ahead and flesh out these. So let's say I'm going to do what I did in this image, which is a 3/4 view and sort of looking down. Okay, so let's do a 3/4 view. And this is for someone who already knows how to do a basic head. Like, let's say you already learned this sort of formula for a basic head. Although I think this works for that too. But just for this example, okay, let's say it's 3/4 view looking down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in that, I'm doing my 3/4 view. And let's see. Okay, then I'm going to think about all the different things. Like, okay, so where is the ear? Well, let's put the ear here. And what I'm doing is I'm thinking about what I remember. I'm not looking at reference. I'm just drawing things based on how I remember them, how I imagine them. I'm drawing like, I think the ear's here. I think the eyes, maybe are up here, and then the nose is here and the mouth is here. Okay. So now that's one attempt. Don't get too detailed. Don't, draw every hair, every pore, every whatever. It's like, no, keep this simple. Okay. Now look at this and then analyze it. Ask yourself, what am I doing? What did I do? And what am I doing differently? And do an iteration on it. So, so I got the line of the face here. And then what happens if I lower the eyes? Okay, so I'll keep the nose about the same, the mouth, and I'll lower the eyes. Let's see, this angle was sort of like this. What if I do it more like this? And put the ear. The ear looked about right. So, okay, let's do that. And let's lower the eyes. Okay, it looks like this. So now what I'm doing is I've taken this, and it's a very minor difference, right, between this one and this one, but I've already fixed something, right? I fixed, like, okay, move the eyes. And again, you're asking, okay, so let's try another one. Okay, what if I make the eyes even lower? Let's try that. Let's bring the eyes down here, and then the nose here, the mouth here. And get the ear here. And then look at this. Okay, better or worse? Well, that's not really looking right. Okay, so which of these three was better? Oh, this one. So what did I do? Well, the eyes were roughly in the middle. Okay, so what's not so good about this? Well, maybe the form isn't reading, This head, it's not going around. How could I solve that? Well, maybe I'll curve the line around. So again, you see the process? It's like creating something and analyzing it and then fixing it. And each time you're getting another iteration. What you're also getting, though, is mileage, because this will get faster just because you're drawing more. See, I've drawn the ear. Maybe the ear is right. So eventually it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I know that part. Start this, do this, get this going in, and get the ear. And all this has become muscle memory. Get the eyes in. And then the nose, maybe that's a thing. Like, oh, what if I make the nose really high, like up like this? And then I make the mouth really high as well. Okay, so then it looks like this. And what's happening is your brain the part that is the intuitive part, the muscle memory part, is very stimulated. It's like, oh, okay, I'm getting my mileage. So this part of the brain, the analytical, the intuitive, this side is getting stimulated. So it's like, yeah, we're getting our mileage. Instead of drawing one head here, what do we got? We got 5 now. And then the analytical side is also getting stimulated. So this is like, yeah, okay, I'm getting my stimulation. What's happening is you're starting to build a connection because you're using both of these sides at once. They're both starting to fire in close duration to each other. So it's like, okay, you're building a bridge, and this is how you improve. This is how you get it to the point where intuitive people might be able to just create because they've got a lot of mileage. Maybe they started early and they've already done 1,000 heads, you know? Whereas you might have just started art and you've done, 10 heads, 100 heads, maybe 1,000, but 1,000 isn't a lot. Because, okay, let's say every day, right? Just do this, 20 heads, okay? So 20 heads a day. So in 5 days, I got 100. So in 50 days, I'll have 1,000, right? Now ask yourself, how long is that? That's a month and a bit, a month and 20 days. But is that a really long time to really get good at a head? To when you have to draw a head, and maybe it is just one view, right? You might think, oh yeah, so I'm really good at this one view. But it's like, yeah, but what if this is one view, right? What is another view? Let's say I'm doing a full frontal, forward-looking face. Anyway, this is an iteration of this, or this is an iteration of this. They're the same thing. It's just another view. Oh, what if I turn this? See, what if I turn this ever so slightly? Okay, so you have this one, and it's looking this way, and it's like this. Okay, what if I turn that? Okay, what if it looks more like this? Well, what's going to happen here? Does it do this? And ask yourself, like, you're sort of guessing, you're sort of experimenting, but you're also analyzing, like, and trying to remember, what have I seen? What have I seen in life that looks like that? Try and imagine, what does a face look like? Because somewhere in your head is the right answer. And then you sort of have to separate yourself. So let's say you do 20 of these, right? 20, that's a good day's work, right? You've done 20 heads. Now, what you should do is stop and wait a day and then look at these again. Like, don't spend the entire day looking at these. Put them away. And then the next day, look at them and do the same thing. Analyze them. What was I doing? What looked right? What looked wrong? And make iterations again. So do this another day. And again, the more days you do this, the more you'll improve, the faster you'll improve, the faster your mileage will, you'll accumulate this mileage because you're drawing much more. So this is really important. Now this actually works for anything. So let's say you have composition class, right? And you took a lesson in school and there's somebody and he's telling you, you know what's a good composition? Rule of thirds. So the first thing you want to do is divide your page into thirds. Right? So, okay, so divide your page into thirds. And your focal point should fall on one of these thirds, okay? And let's say the task is pretty simple. So, what the exercise is to make an appealing composition using a house. So let's show this is the house, our little house. And we have our land. So, okay, so let's put this house here. And let's make this all the land, right? And this is very, art theory type stuff. Like, oh, this is a good composition. This is what will look good, this is effective. So yeah, great. I learned a lot. Okay. Now, that's if you went to a school, you learned your theory. Now let's approach this from an iterative drawing method. So forget all this. With iterative drawing, start from just creating a bunch of boxes and like create 20, right? So 20 boxes. Okay, so first thing you want to do is you have your two elements. You have the land, right? And you have your house. Okay, where are we going to put this house? Well, maybe if you're starting, just put down your best guess. Let's make the land here. And let's make the house here. So this is our first guess, you know? This is what we think. Now, is this good? No. Is this as good as this in terms of composition? No, clearly not. It's really not that good. It's very boring. It's centered. It's quite dull. It's a pretty weak composition unless you're going for a very specific effect and you want something very dull or very boring. Fine. So let's do an iterative approach now. Okay, so what could we do differently? Well, just ask what if. So what if I take my horizon and I pull it much lower, like this? Okay, so now what? So now our house looks like this. Better or worse? Better, you know? Well, if I put it that much lower and it looked better, what happens if I put it even lower, like this? And then we have the house. It's like, that's interesting now. See, we've got all this empty space. It's like, yeah, but, you know, having the house in that position, it's kind of boring. So let's do this again. Let's take this, and what if we put the house way off to the side here? It's like, okay, so that looks like that. Now, you see what's happening? What if we take this, put the land here, and we put the house a bit closer around here? It's like, hey, that's starting to look okay. You know, what if we move it a bit more and put it somewhere around here? It's like, oh, that's pretty nice. You know, as a composition, that looks pretty good. It's like, okay, so look what we've got. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we arrive at this. You know, roughly, it's very similar to this rule of thirds composition, right? Because, okay, break this into thirds. You know, it's not exact, but it's very close to that very effective composition that you might learn in art school. But we're not done, because we're not doing this school type approach where you just draw, get your teacher to say, yeah, good job, this is the end of the exercise. We're iterating, we're figuring out stuff. So it's like, okay, what if I did the opposite? What if I moved the horizon way up here and I had the house and it's super small and it's like that? It's like, oh, wow, that's a very different feel, you know? So you've got just a little bit of sky and a lot of land, and it's like, okay, so what if we tilt the horizon now and do this? It's like, there's another approach. What if we tilt it and have it sort of cut off? See, it's not even entirely on the page anymore. It's like, okay. And this doesn't have to be good in a sense. It's not about like, let's make a finished image. This is not so I show somebody. What this is, what the whole technique is for, is to develop your brain. You're changing your brain from purely analytical to something that has this very intuitive mileage built into it. So next time, let's say you're in art class and someone says, okay, do a cool composition with a house. The guy who's very trained might do this. Okay, so I have to do a cool composition. So let's do the thirds. And, you know, maybe this is going to be the land and the house is going to be here. And the intuitive person might do something like this. And it's like, okay, yeah, so this is the land and this is the house. And why do they come up with this? Because, like, to me, this looks cooler. It looks better. I mean, it's still the composition, so it's different. But it's like, okay, because look at the rule of thirds. Does it apply? Like, let's see. No, it doesn't apply. And why is that important? Because it doesn't matter. These rules are arbitrary. They're not that important. It's the same as proportion. You know, if you said, okay, you looked at a book and it told you the eyes are halfway down the face. Now, if you stick to just learning theory, that's it. You're done. The eyes are, yeah, that looks fine, you know. But an analytical person, intuitive person, or someone who's done this iterative approach would do something like, okay, yeah, so there's a face. Well, I've put the eyes up here, here, here. It just depends, you know, what character is it? Oh, maybe it's like an angry character. Okay, so that's, and a very strange character might put the eyes up here. Yeah, it's got a nose that's pretty interesting, and a mouth like this, and, you know, really boxy face. And it's like, they're not just stuck in this type of world anymore where everything has to be explained. Again, this is something that I've struggled with for a very long time because I was so analytical. I was so good at this stuff, you know? But then I was looking at guys like my friend Bob Meatbag, and he would just, you know, whip out drawings. And I mean, clearly I'm not going to draw as good as him, but he would do his drawings and they were just much more lively, much more free, and not correct in a way. Like, I couldn't look at it and say, yeah, that's, you know, that's following the rules, but they would look better. So this is really the point of this is, okay, you don't just stop with doing something once, because it doesn't let you get far enough. It doesn't let you play around. It's better to do this, get your mileage, but each time you're asking yourself, what if? And the same works for something like color. So this is things people are afraid of, right? So let's say there's a color and I need to color a face, right? Well, okay. So one way is, let's keep it simple and just have a skin tone and hair, right? So, okay, so what I'm going to do is select this and just copy it a few times. Instead of doing one, right? I'm not doing one. So what is easier in some ways to do is to just get one head and color it and think like, okay, let's open up our color theory book and, you know, okay, so let's play around with a skin tone. What could that be? I don't know. Let's go for this default burnt sienna mixed with white. You get that in. Okay, so there's our skin tone. And we learn that, okay, maybe there's a brown, and we get that in. It's like, okay, fine, you know. Is this color scheme bad? No, it's not. It's not bad. And this is for someone who learned about colors and learned like, okay, these are the colors that, you know, this is how you mix them. You use your raw umber or your burnt sienna or whatever. Now, let's say you're not trained at all. Okay, so you're gonna do an experiment and you're just gonna iteratively draw. Maybe at first you start like this. Okay, so let's pick this color for the skin, and let's pick this color for the hair. Now, this is not quite working, right? But you can ask yourself, what is different? What is not right about this? Like, before you move on, and you don't get to see this at all, right? But before you move on, think about it. What's different about this? Well, what if the skin was not this tone? So let's select this tone. And what do you want? What if it's more saturated? It's like, oh, is this looking better or is it looking worse? No, that still doesn't look. What if it's less saturated? Like, okay. So that's that's 3 iterations now, right? I get to see what if it's more saturated, less saturated. It's like, okay, what about this hair? What if the hair is, again, less saturated? Like, okay, so that's happening. Well, that's interesting. What if it's darker? Oh, so we get this. And you see what's happening? We're no longer stuck in this one way of doing things. You might get more creative and like, okay, so what if the skin looks like this? It's like, okay, that's weird. And then the hair is brown, and let's do this. It's like, okay, that's not really working, is it? And then it's like, why isn't it working? What if I make the hair this color? Is that better? It's like, yeah, I don't know, not really. And one fast way is to just do this. In Photoshop anyway, you can press Control U, brings up this hue saturation slider, and just do this. Like scroll back and forth. And then it's like you're seeing all these colors, and it's like, hey, this one looks okay. What I'm doing is I'm waiting for a feeling of like looking at it and some part of you saying that's either interesting or that looks about right, that looks okay. So you go back and forth. It's like, oh, that's looking good. Okay, what about saturation? What about more saturated? It's like, oh, that looks like that. What about less saturated? Oh, that looks like that. A bit of saturation seems good. What about lightness? Really light, really dark. It's like, oh, this is okay, but it blends in with the face too much. This is looking pretty okay. So then there you go. And then what'll happen is the more you do this, the more you'll start to see patterns. Like, okay, so I notice the hair's sort of there, the skin's sort of there. So the skin is lighter, but it's also closer to green. The hair is darker and it's closer to blue. So let's try this, but without that hue saturation thing and using a different color. So let's say we used like this color. Okay, so what's happening is we're going to go towards this purple, and we're going to go down. It's like, okay, what does that look like? Oh, that actually works. What if we went the other way and we went this way and went more orangey? It's like, okay, that works too. So then what would you learn? Well, it doesn't matter which way you go so long as you're moving in the right direction. But I might look at this and like, yeah, you know what? This looks too pink. Compared to what? Compared to the hair. So what if we make it like this? Oh, that's fine. And then you've just got all this range. Whereas the person who, maybe they went to art school or, took lessons or whatever, they're stuck. They're stuck in this because that's what they know. That they know it looks good. And eventually, if you do this so many times, someone could say, okay, make this kind of thing, they just have some pretty bland skin. Okay, so it's like that. And no, that's a bit too saturated. And what about the hair? It's brown. Well, I know that if I go here and do this type of extreme brown, it's going to be too strong. So I'm going to tone it down, and maybe they have blonde hair, but I know from experience that blonde is often not blonde the way you think of it. And so you get some of this. And it's like, oh, okay, so your hair is working more, your colors are working more, and people can look at that and then say, you have good color sense. Well, why do you have good color sense? Is it because you read it somewhere? No, it's because you've put in colors so many times, you've made these experiments, you've made enough iterations that you can naturally connect these things together. So when I've said so many times before, the key is to build up your mileage. Well, yeah, that is the key. You got to build up your mileage, and you've got to draw. But just, taking a page, and even if you did this, like you did a bunch of, circles, because I mentioned this with the eyes before. It's like, okay, I'm going to do a page of eyes. If, for instance, I just draw randomly, like, okay, I'm going to draw this eye. Okay, that's great. Now I'm going to draw this eye. Now I'm going to draw an eye like this. I mean, sort of. Yeah, are you learning? Are you getting mileage? A little bit. But is this really helpful? No. What is more helpful? It's to take something you've done and analyze it. So, okay, I did this eye. okay, let's try something else, but we're still doing this eye. We're not jumping around. So what if I make it long and thin? How does that look? Always analyzing, always making better guesses. Now, when it comes to reference, how do you use that? Well, with reference, I think it's really important not to. And this is sort of a bad thing, right? Like, don't use reference. Well, I don't mean don't use reference at all, but what I mean is don't look at reference, like here's your reference, ref, and then you're just looking at it and then copying as best as you can what you see here, right? I don't think that's the best way to use reference. I think the best way to use reference is this. First of all, don't. So you have your drawing, right? You want to draw a pose. What I would recommend is draw it really small and try and figure out the pose. Let's say you want someone, and they're just standing, but they're standing naturally, right? It's a very natural look. Okay, so let's get this. And let's say we draw this. Okay, so now look at this and say what's right and what's wrong with that. I don't know. Maybe it's too stiff. Okay, so what if I stop using straighter lines and do more curvy lines? Okay, so something like this. Okay, so that looks like that. Okay, well, that's looking more relaxed, you know? What if I make the body really big and the legs really stumpy? You're just asking yourself questions. What if I make it more like this, the other way around, really long? No, maybe this one still suits you better. Okay, well, what if I crossed my arms in this? Again, these are super fast, super messy, not really all that interesting. It's like, okay, so that looks like that. What if I spread the legs out more? But anyway, you get the idea, right? You're just making your iterations. Then what you want to do after you're done with this, you've kind of had some experience. Now is when you look at reference. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at reference, and you might notice something like, oh, in the reference, you know, the person was standing and they did have their arms crossed. And it's like, oh, good. Because, you know, I did that too. But they also had this thing where this hip was coming out. It's like, oh, you know, I never thought of that, you know? And maybe this is what the reference looks like. So, okay, now you've studied your reference. You're not drawing your reference, you're studying it. You're analyzing what is it doing differently. Now, why can you do that? Because you've already done this. You've already gone through, like if I just look at this, right? And I stopped here. It's like, oh, my figures are stiff. And then I look at this, it's like, wow, that is so different. I don't even know how to do that. I don't know the first thing. So then you're more likely to take your page and look at the reference and like, okay, so the head is doing this. And then the shoulders, I guess, are doing that. And then the arm is going like this. And the reason you're doing this sort of, you know, chicken scratchy, unsure way of drawing is because there's too much going on that you haven't explored. But here it's like, okay, well, I've already done one where he's crossing the arms. So then you can compare, instead of comparing this to this, you can compare this one to this. It's like, what's different? Well, oh, they're looking forward. There's a tilt in the hips. Okay, fine. Tilt in the hips, tilt in the collarbone. Let's try this again. So now close your reference, and maybe this is a day later, and try and remember, or maybe it's the same day. I actually recommend you do the imagination thing right after you use reference. So same thing. Okay, so let's take this figure now, and they're crossing their arms. So what do I remember? Oh yeah, the collarbone and the hips were going different. And it's like, okay. And then it's like, okay, more iteration. Well, what if I made, see the collarbones are slanted this way, the hips are slanted that way. What if I make them both slanted the same way, like this? It's like, you know what? That looks not that good. It seems like, I don't know, it doesn't look relaxed at all. It's like, oh, okay, so then what does it mean? Oh, when I draw like this, it looks more relaxed. So the next time you're going to be drawing, you might consider that. Oh, you know, that looks cooler, and do this. And then someone could tell you later, you know, you read something and someone tells you like, hey, you know, doing this creates better characters, better interesting shapes because you get this S curve. And it's like, you might not know that it's called an S curve, but you will know from mileage and from doing it a lot that this looks better. And this is where you want to get to. And so one of the biggest problems I see nowadays is people are drawing and they said, please look at my drawing. And what they'll have is they'll have like a page of drawings, and it might look something like, here's some drapery, and here's a table leg or a stool or something. And I don't know, here's a face, maybe it's a skull. And anyway, so it's like they'll show me stuff like this, and it's like, what do I do? What do I help you with? I don't know. Or even worse, it might be this, and then the next thing they do is like a painting of this. So it's like, okay, so we have this, and then it's like, okay, so the skull is all colored in, and like, what do you think of my drawings? And again, it's like, this is hard to critique. What would have been easier though is forget this, what is interesting to you? What do you really want to do? Let's say I want to draw a stool. Okay, first of all, maybe look at a stool for a while. It's like, okay, so it looks like this. Maybe you don't remember that much, but this is also training your memory, by the way. So if you're wondering, how do people draw from imagination? They're training their visual library. And if you haven't done so, you'll be at a disadvantage. So let's say this is your stool thing. It's like, okay, so try and remember it. And it's like, okay, so I guess it's like this. And then, I don't know, I guess it had 3 legs. And what else? I don't know, maybe it was bigger. Maybe it was like this. And then you'll keep looking at it and trying things. Maybe it was taller, like that. And then maybe it wasn't like this. You might ask yourself, well, maybe, I don't know, something was different here. It didn't feel right. Didn't feel like they're just coming out of nowhere. They must come out of somewhere. Maybe they came out of one thing, and then you have something like this. Anyway, you do your iterations, and then look back at this one, and it's like, aha, so that's what I was missing. I didn't include the little feet thing. I didn't make the legs wide enough, and I made it too tall. And it's like, okay, so next time you come back to this, from imagination, you should pretty quickly be able to remember, like, oh yeah, so I remember I forgot that, I made the feet, I forgot this part. And then you might look at that and be like, something's wrong, about this. Well, what's wrong? It's like, those feet aren't in perspective. Oh, there actually is sort of a pattern, and they form this triangle pattern. Okay, let's try that. But you see, this is how I think it's the fastest way to improve. And rather than seeing all this finished work, I think for a student, it's better to see, pages and pages of just iterations of things. And the beauty of it is I wasn't sure if this technique works, it was a guess. It was a guess. Like, is this a way? Because I'm analytical. So one of the things I did is I looked at people who were good, and I looked at people who were teaching, and the styles I really liked tended to be those intuitive people, the people who people would say, it's talent, they're just talented. And what I thought was, no, forget that. That doesn't help me. If they're just talented, then I'm screwed. That doesn't help. Instead, I wanted to think of it this way. Something is different about them, and what is it? And what I started to understand is this. I started asking this question in my interviews. I said, do you copy art? This was very specific, because I never copied art when I was starting out. I would just draw, and then I might see something, but I wouldn't copy it. And I would just do my own thing to the best of my ability, which wasn't that high. And so it's like that. But the people who I admired when I talked to them, I had the privilege of talking to them, and they would tell me, I used to copy Dragon Ball or whatever, and I was drawing Goku and whatever. So that was a terrible Goku, but you get the idea, right? And so the thing is that I started wondering, okay, so what does this do for them? Well, first of all, you're training your hand. Second of all, you're making the right kind of marks. You're learning how to make marks good. And you're learning what should things look like? What do things that are good look like? And so it's like, yeah, you will improve much faster. But then I felt like, well, but I didn't do this. I didn't copy. I don't really have this ability. So then I broke it down into, well, what is this ability? It's really mileage. It's drawing the same thing over and over again, being obsessed about it, relying on your intuitions. Like, but I'm not intuitive. I can't rely on that. So I'm analytical. So what is the fastest way to bridge this gap? And I thought, what if I just draw over and over again? Will this work? And so I did this, and I did this in my Pointy Chin series as well. And it really is a testament to whether or not I'm full of myself. Am I telling you do this? I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to help you. No, because that's why I'm releasing this video now and not, a long time ago. Although I did start a long time ago with how to practice drawing. Do a bunch of things. Don't just do one. But I wasn't including how much you need to analyze. You really, really need to understand this. It's very important that you analyze. Each drawing you do, analyze it. Even if it's not the same drawing, right? You drew a person. It's like, okay, so these are the proportions. Analyze it. Why these? Put the knees here. Why here? Why not somewhere else? Well, just simplified, I can do this, and I can say, okay, well, let's put them way low, like this. Well, what's going to happen? Well, when they walk, it's going to be weird. But that's a thing. That's another idea. And so you're really freeing yourself, and you're building up mileage. You're drawing way more than if someone just did one drawing. You've done, they can say, oh, in the past week, I've done 5 faces, and you can say, in the past week, I've done 100 faces. Who do you think is going to get better? And then, when it comes down to polishing, because you could still say, oh, but all I have is sketches. I want to do finished works. I think I'm showing that I don't do finished works much, but they're not that hard. And the reason they're not that hard is because all this information is built on drawing, and drawing is the most fundamental skill. So when you can draw, what is painting, right? Like, people think painting and drawing are separate. They're really not. Painting drawing deals with proportion and placement. It deals with form and construction. Deals with perspective. And it deals with anatomy. As well as, if you're in a different industry, let's say you're in architecture, then, whatever buildings are built with. But yeah, structure, what are the forms you're working with? How do these things work? Painting deals with these things. Painting. It deals with value. It deals with color and temperature. And it deals with texture. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. So it deals with really very few things. It's sort of like icing on a cake. It's nice. If you have a cake and you ice it, hey, that's great. If you don't have a cake and you just have icing, well, that doesn't sound too bad. But the point is, it's just what does it fall on? Nothing. So that's why in painting, if someone says, I want to learn how to paint, the first thing I usually see in their work is, no, you don't, sure, you want to learn how to paint, but you're not able to draw. You need drawing first, and drawing does not mean you're using a pencil. I'm drawing right now with a stylus. I could draw with a brush. I could conceivably draw with clay. It's just Does it have proportion and placement? Yes. Does it have form and construction? Well, that's, built into clay. Does it have perspective? That's built in. Anatomy, that's important to learn. So, I'm still dealing with all the things about drawing. So let's say I have a drawing and I want to paint it. Well, learning theory is not bad, but I think this is something you should do as well, the iterative thing, at least until you build up your mileage. Because it's like, okay, so I've learned, okay, so this is a construction of a skull. This is a pretty bad skull. But if I wanted to paint this, what is it about? Well, there's going to be light hitting this object, right? And this is where value comes into play. Value is really just a lot of stuff about light and local color. Like, what is the local value or the local color? Well, if the light is coming from here, right? What forms is it going to hit? And these are all drawn. If you know, well, this is a form. Here you have this ridge, and then it goes down, then it comes up. And this is a form, it goes like this, and then this is a plane, this is a plane, this is a plane, this is a plane, this is a plane. Then you can start analyzing it. What planes are facing the light, right? Well, let's say this plane is, so then you can start doing things like, okay, well, let's just, no, lighter than that, lighter than that. We can get this plane in, that's facing the light, this is facing the light, this is facing the light. And this is all just, I'm using drawing here. I'm not using any magic, anything in terms of, oh, you're using some kind of painting thing. What's not catching the light? Well, this is getting a lot less light. This is getting less light. What's not at all facing the light? Probably this, okay? So like, oh, this gets dark, this gets dark, this gets dark, this gets dark, this gets dark. It's like, well, what do you have? You have form, you have a painted structure, right? And this is all drawing. So it's based on drawing, rather. So I don't know. I guess that's really it. And there's a lot of course, there's a lot of theory in terms of understanding, well, what is the anatomy and whatever. How do you know what value to use? Yes, that's important. And that is something I recommend people work on. But my main point is people are showing me this way too soon, where they don't even have the drawing down and they don't have the mileage. I mean, more than anything, it's that they don't have the experience. They don't have all these years of, or not even years, but all this practice in doing something. It's kind of like the person who, they have a house and the land, and they haven't drawn it in a bunch of views. So they might have this, and then this house, and they can't really even imagine where else the house could be. And then they might ask you, where do I put the house to make a better composition? And I tell them something that maybe it's very annoying, but I tell them, like, you need to draw more and you'll get this. And I'm having to revisit this. Like, it's not just you have to draw more. You have to use iterative drawing, or you don't have to, but it really, really does help to use iterative drawing and understand what's actually going on. Have this ability of, like, well, I've done this a bunch of times, so now I'm no longer asking just a question of like, oh, where's a good place to put the house? Because I know where the good place is. Like, oh, you could do this one. It's like, okay, that's a place. You could do the tilted, whatever. But the questions you ask will be much more pertinent to what you want to learn. So I think I've gone on super long. Very sorry if this is too long. But this is something I think is super important, just this idea. It's probably the most, to this date, it's the most important idea I've given. It's better than the coil technique. It's better than lightning bolt technique. Those are good techniques. Maybe easier in some ways, but this doing a bunch of images on one page, doing 20. 20 is a magic number. Let's just stick with that. If you want to draw anything, do 20 of them on a page. They keep them small so that you can do many versions. And what I do is I always start out with putting blocks. So let's say you wanted to practice composition. Fine, practice composition, but start with like 20 small boxes, 20 small thumbnails, and I'm not going to do all 20 because lazy. But build it based on that. Where could things be? How could things be interesting, instead of relying so much on tutorials and everyone else to tell you this is what you should do. Figure it out yourself. It'll be worth a lot more. With that said, I hope this helped, and thanks for watching.